Is it 40 years though?
40
Do we
years
know?
since
It must be 40 years since we were here,
Well,
yes.
I left in, I think, 60 or 61.
Really?
I think it was then, but it carried on here for a while
We
after
were
that.
here for a while after that.
And I'm trying to remember when we actually, when we made the move from Islet to here. Can you remember which year? Was it
I can't, no.
59? I think I was at Islet Park for about 6-9 months or something, and then we came here. So it must have been either the end, no, it was at the middle of 59, I think it was we moved here, came here. And it was bliss, we had space.
Because you never used this entrance, did you? You
No,
weren't in that one.
No, all the oily rags went in over there. This is only for the suit men here.
Yes. Yes, well, we came in here for the cutting rooms, because there's a cutting room there, one next door and 2 upstairs.
Oh, you were the chosen few.
And we were the elite then, yes. Yeah. Shall we go in?
Go in.
Supercar, supercar, with beauty and grace, as swift as can be. Watch it flying through the air. It travels in space or under the sea, and it can journey anywhere. Supercar, supercar, supercar!
Tanks full. Engines charging at 15,000. Fire 1. Fire 2. Ready, Professor?
Ready, pilot. Move those opening doors.
Well, friend Larry, and what do you think of that? That machine has crossed our path once too often.
Tanks full. Engines charging at 15,000.
Now.
Fire 2. Ready, Professor?
Ready, pilot. Move those opening now.
Full boost critical.
Oh, well, this has changed. This was the entrance. That was the cutting room. There was a door there into the other cutting room. And there was a ladder there, which you could get to the cutting rooms upstairs. Just here was Una's office. Then my office, when I was production supervisor. Then Gerry's and Sylvia's office was there, but you had to go in through that way. The theatre there, do you remember we used to go in there and run the rushes?
Theatre, yeah.
That door there would have been the entrance into the theatre.
The puppeteers weren't down this end very much,
No.
so I don't know.
No, we weren't allowed down this end. No, we were much too dirty for that,
I set up AP Films with Gerry because we had a promise to make 52 episodes of Twizzle, and as we got into Twizzle we realised there was a potential for more work.
Gerry said, well, you know, one day I want to make films, so you can come and edit for me. And then in 1955 he rang me up and said, oh, I've got some films for you to edit. So I said, fine, you know, where is it? And he said at a place called Islet Park. Islet Park was, it was a sort of hotel really. It was let off as flats, and we had a room, or 2 rooms, which was a bedroom and a lounge, and its own bathroom and everything. And we turned the bedroom into a cutting room. Yeah, I had a couple of benches and a moviola to work on. And it was up on the 2nd floor, and it was rather nice. You used to watch the boats go by on the river and all that sort of thing.
And then we went on to, as I said before, we went on to Torchy the Battery Boy.
Gee, I sure would love a piece of cheddar. Good. Then I'll take Mr. Bumbledrop back to Earth in the rocket, and on the way, I'll stop at the moon and get as much cheese as I can. Hello, Moon Man.
Don't hello me.
We made 26, I think, 26 episodes. And then we found out that Roberta was selling them at a quite high price.
We were doing them for peanuts. and she was then selling them to a television company and for, you know, making money. So we drew a halt to that.
But anyway, she wanted us to make another 26, and Gerry didn't want to do it.
Barry Gray, the composer, had this idea for a cowboy series, and told Gerry about it, and they decided that they would like to make it. They shot the pilot for Feather Falls at Islet Park, and then that, of course, was sold to Granada Television. And when Granada decided to buy it, that's when, you know, we realised that it would be better to move to a bigger studio, and so we moved on to the Slough Trading Estate.
This was a time when Arthur Provis, who was one of the founders of the company, left. After Feather Falls, Granada didn't want any more work from us, and so we were once again stranded, and we looked around for other work to do. We found a few commercials that we were able to make for Blue Cars, which was a travelling company.
Gerry Anderson had the idea of this supercar, which could go along the surface at amazing speeds, could fly, could go underwater, could do most of the things that James Bond later did. This was a 15-minute with the pilot, Mike Mercury, a good, clean, all-American guy, his rather freckled sidekick, a kid called Jimmy, and you know, of course, for merchandising, a woolly animal, which was Mitch the monkey.
My brother Hugh telephoned me and said that he had been given a job which was to write 26 scripts for an outfit which were doing something called Supermarionation. In other words, they were doing a television show, a drama show, which was done by puppets rather than by human beings, that he had been asked to do the scripts, and that he certainly couldn't do them on his own, and would I come and help? So I said, sure.
Gerry Anderson had got one 15-minute. Martin and Hugh Woodhouse had got another 15-minute, which was called Beaker's Bureau. And it was, to be perfectly honest, it was a pinch from Professor Brainstorm. And so we worked out Beaker's Bureau around, you know, the sort of scientific investigation of the beddies or whatever it were. So we got that. Gerry Anderson had got a supercar, and we put the two together with Martin and Hugh Woodhouse adding the villain, the master villain, who was called Master Spy, with a very good puppet face, with huge jowls, the sort of things that I'm developing now in old age, and his obviously inefficient sidekick. You have to have an inefficient sidekick called Zarin. So we came up with this 30-minute format.
It was taken to Granada, who weren't interested, and so I suggested they took it to Lou Grade, and I actually drove Gerry up to ATV.
And Gerry went to see Lou Grade, and said, we want to do this series about a thing called, a machine called Supercar. And Lou Grade said, oh yes, how much will it cost? Understandably. And Gerry gave a figure, and Lou Grade said, forget it, that's too much. But if you come back tomorrow, if you can reschedule rearrange your schedule and your budget to make it cost half that much. Well, Gerry sat down with his calculator, I suppose, and his pencil and paper, and came up with a figure which was only a third less than he'd offered to Lou Grade. Instead of a half, you could only reduce it by a third. So he went to see Lou Grade and said, well, I'm afraid it's not just what you wanted, but that's our figure, and that's our last figure. So Lou Grade sort of got up from his chair and went up to a door and said, just a minute, and went through into what Gerry took to be another room, and came back a few seconds later and said, okay, you got yourself a series. It transpired later that Gerry, in fact, discovered that what the room that Lou Grade went into was not another office, an accountant's office or something. It was, in fact, a cupboard.
And I remember Gerry saying, that it all went very well.
We sure pulled a big deal, bud.
Yeah, the biggest yet.
And that Lou said, I'll send you a cheque. And Gerry said that as he was leaving the office, he turned round and said to Lou, should we have a contract? And Lou growled at him, I said there would be a cheque being sent. And the next day, the cheque was there.
Tanks full. Engines charging at 15,000. Fire one.
To pilot a vehicle as revolutionary and, dare I say it, temperamental as Supercar, one must obtain a pilot whose quick reflexes and nerves of steel enable him to stare danger in the face without flinching. Mike is a thoroughly first-class chap, solid, dependable, and with a keen sense of humor that is often utilized to make me look a fool. Not that I am, of course.
They got this character, I think he was ex-American Air Force, called Mike Mercury. He had the characteristics to give him character and appearance. He had a well-developed nose and very bushy eyebrows, and he looked the go-getter type man who you would not stand up against. He would beat you. He really was the positive hero character.
500, 400, 300, 200, fire!
Mike Mercury sounds to me like a young John Wayne, oddly enough. He's got this can-do, sure, let's get on with it, yes, Dr. Beaker, and waiting for Beaker to enunciate. But once Beaker had taken his time to get the solution, he was always spot on with the solution. So, okay, let's go, Let's fire retro rockets. Let's do it, It was great. Very gung-ho. Mike Mercury in Supercar.
Yes,
right?
yes, you had star billing.
No, I had a credit at the end of the show.
This bright little chap found his way into our midst following a terrible plane crash in the sea that left him, his elder brother Bill, and his associate Mitch the monkey adrift in a life raft. Fortunately, Supercar was on hand to pluck them from the jaws of death. Bill returned to Cape Canaveral, asking us to care for the young lad for an indeterminate amount of time. The issue of Jimmy's education has, for some bizarre reason, never been addressed.
One of the major characters in the series, of course, was little Jimmy Gibson, a little red-haired wretch, I thought.
Jimmy was there to be surprised, to help, but not in a brilliant way, in a small boy way, doing the sorts of things that small boys could do, and also to be the audience. You are in Supercar, and you are represented by Jimmy, who is you.
My respect for the lower primates has been raised considerably by my close working relationship with this oversized simian genius. His somewhat alarming appearance is offset by his uncanny ability to get us all out of a tight spot. Unfortunately, he is equally adept at getting us into these tight spots in the first place, and by rights, he should really have been expelled from our midst on several occasions. But one look into those, mischievous little eyes of his, and you just cannot help but love him.
We had lots of fun with Mitch. He was a very good character. We always like monkeys. I mean, monkeys, everybody likes a monkey because they are very human in appearance and yet very animal in attitude. But Mitch was halfway between the two. He understood almost everything that was said to him, and he reacted in almost the way you hoped he would. But usually he was far enough away from the logical way of carrying out a command to cause all the fun and games for yet another episode. You could almost say the Mitch factor, because he really caused problems.
He always stole the scenes. If you had a scene where two characters of the Professor were talking to each other across Mitch the monkey, his eyes would swivel from one to the other, as he, like a human being, very attentively listening to what was being said.
Well, I guess we can allow the request on compassionate grounds. But it's past Mitch's bedtime.
We did find it very challenging to write dialogue for him. Mitch, eek, eek, or I shouldn't go further than that because it may be ethically wrong with the animal kingdom.
Mitch! Supercar to base, are you receiving me?
Now here is a man whose intellect almost rivals my own. Professor Rudolph Hopkins is a very jolly chap. The supercar itself is a product of his limitless imagination and incredible design capabilities, although it must be restated once again that the project would never have succeeded were it not for the assistance of that fine gentleman, Dr. Horatio Beaker.
Poppycock! I beg your pardon. I said poppycock!
He'd also tell you his cooking is superior to mine. You mustn't believe everything you hear, my friends.
I remember my favourite character, for some reason, being particularly Professor Popkiss.
Popkiss was, we felt, Hugh and myself felt, a little one-dimensional.
Ready, pilot. Roof doors opening now.
And we wanted somebody who would be capable of explaining to the audience a little bit about what was going on. So we brought in Professor Beaker, Dr. Beaker, right, who was much more, and his name implies it, he was Beaker. He was the lab man. He was the practical lab man in the white coat who did the real basic stuff.
Yes. Now we come to the real brains behind the supercar project. Your humble narrator. Without my good and, dare I say, handsome self in charge of the operation, I would imagine that the supercar project would have been doomed from the start, lacking as it would my keen intellect. I pride myself on being an excellent... well, yes, well, maybe it's just as well that I decided to hone my other interests, such as photography. Oh, well, I've always had a keen interest in art.
Oh, come now. You're just saying that.
Well, I'll have you know that I can cook up a mean curry Farnsworth.
This is where we wait for it.
What are we waiting for? The explosion?
I fail to see why I must be represented as some kind of imbecile.
Well, now who's a fool?
If you consider that There are three characters, and I'm not saying this just because they were invented by Gerry Anderson: Mike, Mercury, Jimmy, and Mitch. You ain't got a lot of dialogue going between those three. But if you have somebody like Beaker, you know, you begin to get some interesting dialogue going because he's a character.
There was a marvellous chairman of Equity once called Felix Aylmer, and there was a rather an eccentric actress that always used to be jumping up with impossible questions. And Felix said, "Would you please sit down? You are out of order. You are out of order. Please sit down." And I suppose an element of that went into Dr. Beaker.
Oh, I'm so cold, Master Spy. How long must we wait?
Perhaps. Perhaps they have lost their way.
Now, I must confess at this point to know very little about this evil master of disguise or his abominable accomplice who have attempted to steal Supercar for themselves on several occasions. Master Spy himself is truly an unspeakable fiend whose unbelievably brilliant disguises have given him the ability to deceive us on more than one occasion.
Excuse me.
Certainly. I mean, yes?
My friend and I wish to reach Bonneville Flats for the speed trials. Would you perhaps put us on the right road?
Master Spy? Well, now who's a fool?
Oh, indeed.
He is aided, as it were, by a chap whose mental capacity is about equal to that of a cockroach, whose courage is non-existent, and whose hands are alarmingly large. Mr. Zarin is, however, as dangerous and as despicable as his employer, although it has to be said that together they are no match for the Supercar team.
He was a large, fat, menacing, corpulent character who reminded me very much of Sidney Greenstreet, the great actor of the film noir films that Warner Brothers used to make in the 1940s. He was always playing villainous parts too, along with his sidekick, usually played by Peter Lorre. And in our series, the sidekick was called Zarin. And I used to try to recreate this marvellous bit of nostalgia for film noir by changing the lighting slightly in their scenes, making it slightly more, if possible, more atmospheric to create a greater feeling of tension.
This was where Gerry Anderson let his puppeteers create what puppetry is all about, which is a caricature.
I definitely think he was modelled on Lou Grade.
Master Spy and his assistant.
I remember that very well.
Were down either in the cave or a cellar somewhere. So we had a cellar at the studio, so put the mic down there. Then, of course, have to set the machine going, go down the cellar, and there is John in front, Master Spy, heavy footsteps, me tripping behind. And after a moment or two, you get the giggles, and that is it. You cannot carry on anymore. Master Spy
was just a wonderful idea. And I used to think that when he laughed and his whole body sort of shook. Sort of an early version of Jabba the Hutt, you know, this great guy sitting there. And the fact that Zarin was such a weed, you know, and he shut up, you worm.
Bit of a crawler. And then he was always trying to insinuate himself with Master Spy. Yes, of course, Master Spy. You are always right. I do my best to please you. How's that going?
That's
Is
yeah.
that you think?
That's him.
Have I got the part?
That's the man. Yeah.
Have I got the part? Don't break my heart.
You've got it.
What was so interesting to me about Supercar was the kind of unified design.
which was very difficult. You couldn't see it in most old puppet work with television. There was very rarely a design style that went through it.
You made the clay first, and then took a rubber mould, and then took...
Well, you had to have a plaster outer casing
yes,
to pour
hold
the rubber into. Yeah.
And then the fiberglass was put into that, a gel coat, just like you make a boat. And then the rubber was, the plaster was taken off, and then the rubber was peeled back, and you're left with this and a bit of tidying up and some paint.
I mean, this is a fairly traditional body structure for any kind of string puppet used in live performance. This tongue and groove joint for the legs is one. This arm with the brass plate is another common one. Sometimes it's a leather strip that is joins the two parts together. The important thing is this is polished again so that the costume will move on it, won't get caught. It's got lead on these arms, which is unnecessary, and in fact it's very dodgy. We used to lead weight the feet, but never the arms, because what I always used to try to persuade them to, and Kristen did, was to put elbow strings on, because it gives a much more dramatic potential. This is interesting because it's got a separate neck as well. The later figures didn't. They had a solid neck, but that was important because it needed space for the solenoid in the base of the neck, so more room was needed, so the head was made in one. But in actual fact, it reduced the expressive potential of the head. The other thing is just using head strings. They normally had shoulder strings, all puppets, and that's very important. But the whole of the body hung from the head strings, which was a problem too. You didn't get so much expression out of the figures because of that.
Getting inside the back of the head was always a drama, as I said, because particularly the ones that had wigs on, because the wig had to be taken off, the back of the head opened up, in with the screwdriver, check that it worked, put it all back again, and then trying to get the wig back.
And Master Spy being bald was very difficult, because once you've taken the back of the head off, you've got the crack where the join was, and you had to carefully put bits of plasticine over to hide the join and repaint it.
But having a big neck
did
help.
That was handy.
What made them different to ordinary puppets was the fact that they were able to talk in sync with what was happening on the stage.
Gerry was always talking to us about making things better and lots of more movements and things, and we said that we thought we might possibly be able to help him with the development of the lip sync movement. So experiments were done, and my partner, who is extremely clever, Charles Hollick, clever person, he started to do research on it, and then we made various little bits of mock-ups. These were then sent to AP Films, and gradually we developed the parts which they built into the heads. We didn't do all of the work ourselves, but we had people in Birmingham who were working for us, Roland Wright, who was very well known to Gerry, and Harold Buckley did the actual work on the actual head mechanism, and that was done in Birmingham, and then they fitted them into the heads back in London.
The way the lip sync worked, first of all, the show would be recorded. The dialogue would be recorded. Then it would be edited to get any, wrong words out or that sort of thing, and edit it for timing. And then that was then played when you came to film. That was played off a tape machine.
From what we call the control box, which was right at the end of the studio, there was a tape playback machine, and the dialogue went through the wires, down the puppet wires into the puppet's head, and inside the puppet's head was a solenoid, little sort of electromagnet, which moved the mouth open and close.
9,000, 11,000, 13,000, 14,000.
One of the things that happened, because of the director directing from a booth, he had to be able to see what the camera was looking at. And so think it was John Reed had the idea of putting a television camera looking through the eyepiece of the Arriflex, so that and then that was you know, came through on a screen in the booth, so you could see exactly what the camera was doing.
And Gerry had this square view of the world, which was this monitor that told him that's what it is. But what was happening just outside that monitor? And of course it was open to abuse, because what the people used to do, they used to just pan the camera off onto a bit of wall, and he'd be raging up there, and all he could see was a bit of brick and a fire bucket, and he couldn't see anything else other than what he could see through the window. But there were so many lights and things in the way that, and I used to think to myself, just come out. Come out. If you come down on the studio floor, you'll understand immediately why we're not shooting. He used to be shouting up there, saying, you know, why aren't we turning? Why aren't we going? You know, we've only shot 2 seconds today or something.
What on earth's going on down there?
And he, I said, if only he came out of the room and came down and had a look, he'd find out what it was. And of course, I used to, and being the downstairs puppeteer, and Mary will remember this, he used to say, that puppet's mouth isn't moving properly. It was either too much sensitivity, as he used to call it, so he used to say, hello, how are you today, into the mouth. Or else it was the other way, and it used to go, hello, how are you today? And you had to find this optimum, and there was a lot could be done from the lip sync room. But inevitably, some of it had to be done from adjustments inside the head. And to do the adjustments inside the head, the wig had to come off, and the back of the head used to have to be opened up. And a lot of tweaking, and then you had to turn it round and say, run the test again. And he used to look at the monitor, and he'd say, no more, used to go on. So what you used to do is just stand in front of the camera, so your backside was in front of the lens, and count to 50. And he'd stand away again, try that, how's that? And he'd go, test it, oh, that's much better. And we'd carry on. And of course, it was pure Emperor's New Clothes.
The puppeteers worked from what's called a bridge, which was literally a bridge. It was made of Dexion. And the puppets were worked from this bridge. And there were little stages with the scenery on, which were probably about 2 feet from the actual ground. And these little stages were on wheels, so that you could move them in and out.
With the bridge being suspended from the ceiling, we had to have some way of getting up and down. And there was a ladder which could be taken away so that it wasn't in the way of the sets underneath. And so once we were up there, somebody'd come along and remove the ladder. And of course, we'd be left up there. People, being the puppeteers up high like that, people would forget about us up there and go off, and there we'd be shouting for somebody to come and put the ladder back for us.
The one main bridge there had 2 rails because the figures would work over the back and over the front. And Roger was quite an athletic character, and there was one point, and very hot, you can imagine, and very hot, he sort of, he stood with his feet, one each side on this bridge, so that we could work beneath his legs and so on. And there was this funny thing where Roger used to wear a hand-knitted string vest. And because it was rather boring through the shooting, Christine noticed the end of this piece of string and gradually pulled until Roger was left with just the neckband and the armbands of the string vest and a pile of string on the floor.
So where would your bridge have been? That was permanent, your bridge, wasn't it?
Yes.
It didn't know.
It was from the rafters above.
I would have thought it fell from this one, I would think.
Beam, yeah.
Probably from that beam.
Yeah.
And it went that way down the studio. Yeah. And it was, I think, probably not quite in the centre, slightly that side.
Oh yes, it would have been back to
yeah. So this was the main shooting area, and then there was backing for lights, all backing along, running along that wall.
I remember Madge Saturday used to sit here with a table and a chair doing the costumes for the puppets. And then I think further up the wall there were puppets hanging.
We used to keep, there was like a store, it was either here, we used to hang them all when they were not on the set, and it was like they were stored here, weren't they? And they had a rail of some sort up there, and then the poles.
We had a long pole
unhook them.
to hook under the control, hang on to the puppet and shift it over like that to the bridge.
Do you know, I'd forgotten all that.
Well, the thing was that one of the difficulties, and everybody forgets how difficult it was to get the puppets to the operators right there, because they were fairly isolated up there, because once you took the ladder away, they couldn't get up or down.
Right, yeah,
and to give them a puppet, because we needed to do a different scene. You had to, so they used to have these poles that they hooked onto the control, and you held the puppet on the pole, and then you walked it across and gave the top to the camera, to the puppet operator who was at the top there.
Because the wires all had to be kept straight.
Yeah, it does seem strange with all this low ceiling here. That wasn't here. I mean, the bridge was more or less where your feet were more or less where this floor is here, this mezzanine floor that's been put in the puppeteer's feet.
That would have been about the height.
I mean, it maybe not quite as high, because remember you just cleared your head.
Yeah, the stages, about 2 foot.
And let's say down here was right down to the control room. It's very, very dark down there. Go on down anyway.
I like working with Chris because we always finished up laughing all the time. We used to laugh all the time. And she was a brilliant artist. She was a wonderful draft person and craft person too, as well as a very fine operator. One of the finest operators of marionettes. She was a great pal, actually, a wonderful character.
One had to employ a certain amount of discretion in the casting of, in the choosing of the puppeteer to use for a given character. Christine's characters were always slightly more balletic and smooth-moving. But if you want somebody with character and a slight feeling of suspense and edge, Mary was the one to do that.
I remember one sequence, we had to have Dr. Beaker, would you believe, playing the drums. I was absolutely amazed how they could make this guy actually play the drums.
Most satisfactory, man.
Staverdales, yes, they were a couple who were puppeteers in their own right. They had their own show. Madge was doing the dressing, did the dressing of the puppets, while Buster worked as a puppeteer on the bridge. I can't remember how long they worked on puppets, but it wasn't really their type of work, I don't think, they felt in the end.
They weren't used to
film. They were stage people.
And it took Gerry, or whoever was directing then, quite a long time to try and explain to him that it had to be much more subtle.
They're like a good instrument, a good violin, and whilst you're working on the series with them, their personalities, every puppet, when you're operating it, it develops, it's bound to. The girls that used to do this, they used to spend sometimes, over half an hour on each shot, just getting rid of these wires, looking through the camera, going back, puffing a bit more here, a bit of anti-flare on here. And I mean, it's very depressing when somebody will say to us, of course the wires showed.
Everyone was ranting, we've got to get rid of the strings, we've got to get rid of them. And I seem to be quite good at turning them down with anti-flare, then puffing powder paint on them to blend them in with the background.
You get people who say, well, if you can't see the strings, they're not puppets. So then you have this other school. We tried to eliminate the strings so they wouldn't be shown. But then, as I say, some people said, no, you must see the strings because otherwise you wouldn't know they were puppets. That I felt was a little difficult to take, because if you couldn't spot a puppet was a puppet without the strings, I think there was something wrong with your eyesight.
The difficulty with the very long strings, I mean, as we said, when you're a normal marionette operator, you would have strings that were quite short. And the good thing about short strings, you get a very direct action. When you pull the string, the leg moves or the arm moves very quickly, and if you turn a puppet very quickly, the puppet turns. The trouble with these very, very long strings was that there was this amazing delay all the time. Particularly if the puppet turned or walked, you'd turn it and nothing would happen, and then it would move later.
The time one spent getting everybody and everything ready for the moment when the camera was going to be switched on to make a take. You know, where you've got to check if this one is right, if the puppeteers, sometimes it would be 3 or 4 puppeteers all standing there holding this weight, you know, waiting for the moment when you were going to turn over. There are strings that have to be dusted and you know, got rid of, you know, because they would glisten in front of the camera. There might be somebody who's got to do something at a particular moment, you know, and everybody's got to be ready. And so everybody, after all this time we've been waiting, rehearsing, lighting, getting the right lens, doing all these things, everything's ready. And so, you know, you say, okay, turn over, action, you know, and the string breaks and a puppet's gone wrong, or the eyes have gone up in the air, or the arm has come off, or...
That's right.
You know, it was... Every day was like that. And when you've got to, you know, make a certain number of shots in that day, you know, it just makes everything very, very tense at times.
Puppets inevitably, during the course of operating, used to get tied up in knots, and arms went backwards and hands that were flipped backwards. And to start with, you used to have to ask the camera technicians to sort it out, and they were sort of a bit like asking Godzilla to do some brain surgery. They sort of, oh, it seems to have come off, you know. And so the downstairs puppeteer became quite important in order you could actually sort out arms that were twisted the wrong way and bits of clothing that were sort of off shoulders and things like that. And as Mary has already said, the repairing of the inevitable strings that broke all the time with the wires. When they had the wires, they were, I won't go into the technology, but in order to make them black, they etched the wires, and which made them very brittle. Well, I think that the bridge that we were all standing on, being the puppet department, was here. Actually, I think it's more that way. It wasn't under the ridge. I'm sure we were towards that wall.
Towards the building.
But as I said, it is very difficult to tell with all this racking here. Yes. But we've been down this aisle, and you can see where the control room was, or more or less get the idea. I was telling Dave the story that Bob Bell, who was a set dresser at that time, and he was trying to get some lumps of coal piled up in a little heap to look like some rocks in the prairies, and they're all painted grey, the coal was, but coal looks wonderful because it looks like strata in miniature rock. And Gerry was getting very cross with him and was shouting on the intercom, for goodness sake, hurry up, and he couldn't get these coals to balance right, and they were losing time, and Gerry was getting more and more frustrated. But secretly Bob had got these lumps of foam rubber that were exactly the same colour as the coal. And when finally Gerry said, for goodness sake, hurry up, and Bob jumped up and said, oh, for God's sake, and he took these lumps of rubber and he threw them straight at the glass of the control room, because everybody had seen him handling the lumps of coal a few seconds earlier, and the whole control room disappeared under the desk, and the rubber went boing and just bounced off the glass, and there was a moment's silence, nothing happened, and then very slowly they all came slowly up over the desk.
Yeah, Gerry did see the joke though.
He did, yes, he did laugh. He did laugh, yes.
Yeah, he had to, everybody else was.
Everybody else, yes. Bob's timing was amazing, was immaculate, perfect.
Supercar, of course, was Reg's baby. He designed it.
Reg was a man who was very precise with what he wanted, and he was a stickler for detail and also for delivery time.
Very dour and very direct, and if you got a smile from him, you really had, you had made it. That was it. It was like getting an Oscar. It was fantastic. But most of the time, when you made something you're very proud of, you showed it to him, and he used to go, yeah, right.
Reg Hill was very good with ideas. Also, he's a brilliant art director. And one of the things Reg could do was draw a plan, but if you were sitting at the desk with Reg and Reg was one side, you were the other, Reg would turn the paper round, or he wouldn't turn the paper round. I mean, he would draw something upside down for him, but to be the right way up for you. He was very clever like that, but always had lots of ideas and always went into everything thoroughly.
He was a bit of a boy racer, even though he was a sort of middle-aged man. But I think he'd probably been a bit of a racer when he was a lad. And he bought himself Ford Escort. It was one of the Escort, Ford Anglia, I think it was. I mean, that real sort of humpy thing. But he had it souped up with some amazing twin overhead, this, that, and the other, and before turbos and things. But it went like a rocket. But it looked very innocent. It was grey and it looked like an ordinary little car. And he fancied this, and he used to roar off in it. And he parked in the same place in the front of the studio every day. It was his little bay, and he parked. And when he left at night, he backed out as one, a bit like Starsky and Hutch on the way out. And then one day, when we were at work, the council came along and put a lamppost in. They put the lamppost behind his car. They dug the hole, put it in. When he came out at night, it was dark, and he jumped in the car, and he backed out at about 30 miles an hour to this lamppost. I mean, the car just stopped dead, and the lamppost was bent, and the back of his car was, I mean, it had a boot, traditional shape. You know. It was right into the rear window. I think it actually cracked the rear window. So he must have hit it with an amazing speed, and it was the biggest shock of his life, you know, because it was like a routine for him. He just did it involuntarily, in, out, every day. But the council putting the lamppost there was I remember laughing myself sick about it. He didn't think it was very funny.
Certainly it was one of Reg Hill's proudest achievements. He really did love the fact that he was the designer of Supercar.
Supercar, if you dropped it, it broke, I can tell you that. Or if you didn't get hold of it in the right place, a piece could come off in your hand, because it was basically balsa wood. And, you know, the perspex would crack and cloud. And you try cleaning perspex, you know, and then you've got, don't forget the shape of the dome. I've got one light up there on me. We would have 3 or 4 lights round. I can see a light, there's a reflection. You can't track the camera that way because we're picking up that light. More problems created.
I remember carrying this thing. It was about sort of 5 or 6 foot long. There's a picture of it in one of those. And you had to carry this thing like this. And when you put it on the set, there was always terrified somebody would drop something from above. From the puppets would, you know, even a pencil end on or a biro end on down would have just punctured it, because it was, and it used to get dented, and we had to go to ridge. And the wings used to extend. They came out with electric motor, and they had this screw thread, and it worked beautifully. And first it was arrived from the model makers, and the wings came out lovely. And then after about a week, one of the rods that wound it out got bent slightly, so one wing came out beautifully, and the other one used to go. To come out like this, and Reg had a fit because it all had to be taken to bits, and this rod had to be straightened.
They had a sort of small model, an intermediate model, and a larger model.
On the original model, as far as I understand it, the lights on the front here, which sadly didn't work for whatever reason, were cut from original small car indicator lights or tail lights. This would have been a block of balsa wood, but basically there would have been sections through the model all the way down, and then the model was layered with strips of balsa wood all the way along, then sanded and finished like that. The canopy was moulded carved as a solid block of wood. This was then vac formed, as far as I understand it, in 1/4-inch perspex. In present-day language, that's 5-6mm perspex. I think actually it was thicker than that. But as far as I understand, when they broke the canopy, they actually had to cut it and join it to get a complete canopy. They also had a top here, as you know, that split down the middle, which could be taken out. At one point, I believe they tried to drill a hole in the middle of it here, but I'm not sure about that. In the shots that I've seen it, they used to just take sections of the canopy away so that they could show the canopy top, but with the wires coming through from the side. The wings on this model pull out the same as they did on the original. As far as I know, these would again probably have been solid balsa wood. I'm assuming these would have been solid balsa wood. I think that Reg did the chrome parts like I did in solid aluminium, and actually turned them out of aluminium as I did for this model. On On this model, this has got real leather seats in it, and I think as well, looking at the original, they either used real vinyl or real leather for the seats as well. Likewise, the tubes, the retro rockets, again would have been real metal tubes which were sawn off. Obviously they were metal because, like the tailpipes, they had to fire, so they had to contain jet charges, so they will be real metal. You perhaps would have had, this would have been a sheet of balsa wood here, balsa wood probably for these as well, and balsa wood of course for the fins as well.
We would use a system called back projection, so that you had a screen and a projector at the back of the screen, and you would project what was called a back projection plate, which could be a shot in the air. It could be a motorway, you're travelling up a motorway, could be a scene at sea, and this scene would be played or projected onto the screen, and then in front of the screen you would have your actor, your puppet. Now that there would have been a special effects stage, wouldn't it?
I think so. This is very different, this interior here.
Yes.
And I'm very mystified where the walls were. I think this one was here.
That was an original wall, yeah.
And
that's why
there was one missing there, wasn't there?
Yes, there would have been a wall there.
And that further one further on wasn't there at all.
That wasn't there, no.
Yes, I think there was a wall about here somewhere.
Yeah. This would still have been corridor here, wouldn't it?
Yeah, corridor. Well, I think the main entrance was over here. As I remember, there was a wall here.
Yeah.
About here anyway, and the entrance, if we look at the concrete outside this door, there's an apron bit, and you can see it was the old entrance in here. So as I remember, there was a wall across there.
Yeah.
And I seem to remember that the back projection screen, was my department before I left. I was in charge of the back projection unit, and the screen was about here or somewhere where this joint in the concrete is, and it was a hole in the wall with the screen stretched on it, and the back projector was around the corner there, and it projected along one bit of corridor onto a mirror and then down a corridor onto the wall here, and then we used to set the models up in front of the screen here, and I remember it was very close to the door because if something had to come in, we had to move everything. Where they loaded stuff in and out again. It was a real problem.
The back projection screen then was a frame with tracing paper over it, and projection used to come through it. Later on, they got more expensive ones, but that's what we used to do, and they used to get damaged very simply, especially if you wanted to do overtime. Somebody would fall through the screen. Or something, or a puppet, or something would go through it. An electrician would turn around with a light and it would just, new screen, that's it lads, we're on an hour tonight.
I remember spending a day on the motorway with John Reed in a hired car, which was a Jaguar, and we were going up and down the motorway at speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour.
There was myself, John Reed, Dave Elliott. I think Dave was driving, John had his meter, and the silly idiot was stood on the seat with the camera out the top.
And we had special permission from the police, who always pounced on us when we stopped to know what we were doing.
But at the end of the day, it didn't nick us. They were more interested in what we were doing and what we were doing it for. And it was a matter of, can we come down to the studio and have a look and see what it was doing? That's when coppers were real, you know what I mean, and they were human. Now they just nick you.
And another time I took one of the cameramen, an Indian chap, whose name was Ray. Lovely man, very nice cameraman, very good. I took him down to Brighton to shoot some back projection plates of a rough sea. And we'd rented a boat. A fisherman took us out in his boat, which was a rowing boat, and we went to the end of the pier at Brighton. And it was really, really rough. And it's the first time I've ever seen a white Indian. He literally went white and was terribly seasick. And of course we didn't get our back projection plates, and so I said to Ray, well, we've got to get these shots, and So another week we went down, and he was lowered on ropes from the end of the pier at Brighton to film these scenes, which was just as bad because the electricity for the camera was 230 volts. So we're lucky he didn't get electrocuted.
We had to come up here at White Waltham, and with a twin-engine plane, we flew over the south of England, shooting clouds. We shot a lot of the background plates here at White Waltham, and those hangars at the back there appear in the first episode.
Do you read my position? Over.
Roger. Organizing helicopter rescue. Over.
Gordon Davey, one of the editors, I don't know if you remember Gordon, used to park his car here, and I was in the cutting room upstairs when I was editing, you know, in my week off I'll be editing, and we used to throw our dog ends out of the window, and they all used to land on Gordon's car on the roof. At least that's what he says. I said I never used to throw them up, but there you go.
That's what you were doing while we were working.
Well, you were working, yes.
Yes, we were just slimming.
If we go around the corner, this is where John built his tank, wasn't it?
Yeah.
John built the tank there.
Yeah.
It sort of it went in a V shape, didn't it, like that, with a screen at the back.
Yeah.
And then you
I think that was after I left, because they used to have a round one here that they set up, a temporary one that we used to do for early Supercar.
Yeah, John built a brick one which was in a V shape, you know, the camera lens angle, and there was a screen, and you dropped the supercar into the water, didn't you? Yeah.
Well, I remember when I got frustrated and things weren't working out, or I'd made a mess of something, I used to come out here and kick a cardboard box about. And I used to get it usually stuck on my foot, and I was exhausted and fall over on my back. Yes, it was a way of getting rid of all that frustration.
But I remember Gerry sort of came out of a door there, and John was cementing a brick, you know, and Gerry shouted out, "I bet you feel a real brick doing that, don't you?" Yes. Do you remember when you were actually filming this? It was in the rush hour, and John had got all the lights shining on, and all the cars coming down here, the motorcyclists and cyclists, all stopped to have a gawp.
Yes.
And it must have held. I wonder what the people at the end of the queue must have thought, oh my God, what's going on? Been an accident.
Yeah. But exterior shots used to blow things up here.
Yeah.
All the explosives.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Crates of dynamite.
Yeah.
About this big.
That's it. Yes. God.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Come back yesterday. To shoot underwater, we wondered how we could do this. And Reg had this idea. I remember we were sitting down, Reg and Gerry and myself, and Reg said, "Now there's a good thing." And we said, "What's a good thing?" And he pointed to a calendar of fish. There's a calendar, and the picture on the calendar were fish swimming around. And Reg said, "I've got this idea. If we had an aquarium, put fish in, and shone light through the top," said it would look as though it was underwater. What a good idea. So we experimented, and then finally we had built a very, very large aquarium, which was probably about 7 foot square. It was on wheels. It's 7 foot square, it was only about a foot wide.
We put the camera at one side and the action at the other side. So you were shooting or filming through this tank. And again, we had to get the depth of field such that the fish were sharp and Supercar was sharp, and the action the other side was working. So anything you see in the way of an underwater scene was filmed through this glass tank.
And often with people with sticks.
Oh, yes.
You know, directing the fish to go.
Oh, yes, indeed, yes. You had to have people with a stick sort of cheating so that the fish would swim away from it to get them into shot at the right time. Yes, we gave our fish some stick, I suppose you could say.
Mix 4.
Supercar, Supercar, with beauty beauty and grace, as swift as can be. Watch it flying through the air.
It travels in space or under the sea, and it can journey anywhere.
You remember Barry Gray because I thought his music was inventive and descriptive, which was very, very good. Unfortunately, Barry is another member of the old team who's no longer with us.
Barry was wonderful again, you see, and a real pro. I mean, to compose music for film at his speed is just something.
He was an enchanting character. He was very North Country, very talented. He had a great feeling for melody and dramatic moments. His scoring of the episodes was always bang on.
Supercar, supercar. He went to see ATV, and there the storyboard displayed. As interest grew, he showed it to Lou, and Lou said, "This will make the grade."
I understand at some stage or other he bought a very expensive car, which may have been a Porsche, but he was very anxious that his mother didn't find out about it, because she regarded it as a great expense. And so what he used to do is he would drive back from perhaps our studios or whatever other studios he was working at, go into the underground car park at Hyde Park or Marble Arch or somewhere, and park his expensive car there, and then move to another aisle and crawl into an old banger, which he then would drive home and park very, very quietly outside the front door of the house.
He was Vera Lynn's musical director, wasn't he?
She was the forces sweetheart in the Second World War, you know, which really is quite a way ago.
Don't even try to remember.
No, I won't. I don't remember it, I only heard about it.
CQ3, M8, take 4.
Slightly quicker still.
Say, this tastes great, Jimmy.
Yeah, its walls certainly corner with a new streamlined top.
Only threepence. Well, let's get some more.
You can't help falling for a woes.
What was it? What's going on?
It's a pirate raid, Mr. Beebe.
Number 1 gun. Fire! Number 2 gun ready, sir.
Number 2 gun.
Fire! Well, that's the end of it then. Curious. Most curious.
What is?
The cuneiform inscription here. It's the exact copy of that on the tablet.
Ah, for Pete's sake, Doc. Here we are in an all-time mess, and all you're concerned with is the writing on the wall?
Well?
The writing on the wall. That's another word for fate, isn't it?
You may well be right, but in a different sense. It may be our fate to escape from here. Come and look. Come and look at this. This inscription reads, as before, in his mouth was the door to all wisdom, all power, but beneath Feel the draft? There's a small hole.
Yeah, but what does it do?
Well, it is my surmise that this gives the inscription a double meaning. That, in fact, this is the lower end of a speaking tube connecting the mouth of Sargon's effigy on the slab above. So a priest down here could utter prophecies on Sargon's behalf. But the very words into his mouth, as it were.
So where does that get us?
Why, out, of course. Watch. Mitch. 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 Mitch.
You're probably scaring the pants off him yelling like that.
Where the actors were was the theatre where they showed the rushes, wasn't it?
Yes.
That's right. So we used the projection room as our control room, and the actors had the studio, which was the
film, the actual playback, the theatre.
Yes,
yes.
that's
What
right.
was the film theatre
Where they showed the rushes.
They showed the rushes, and that became a studio, and we had a couple of mics in there.
If it's not obvious why we recorded on a Sunday, it's because it was on a trading estate in Slough.
It was quiet.
And it was the only time it was quiet.
The rehearsal, the take, lunch was usually sandwiches, and normally we would start around 9:30, be finished by about 5:30. They were all very efficient, very easy to work with, and it was usually a good day.
The challenge is to take a stack of 90 pages and plow through this and get each scene done as well as you can, you know, or to print, and then eventually at the end of the day you've gone through these. It was the concentration and the standard. I'm still surprised at the standard that we came up with.
At the start of the series, we had recorded the scripts, and then Gerry was not happy with the voice for Jimmy, and he telephoned to ask if we had studio time because Sylvia was going to record the voice. And so she came to Birmingham to do the recording. First time she'd ever done anything like that, so she was very nervous, but made an excellent job of it. And from then on, she went to do all the other voices, female voices, in the scripts.
Are you sure he's with us?
Look, it doesn't matter. Miles said if he's crooked, we use him. If he's not, we get rid of him at the other end.
George Marcel, who was the voice of Master Spy, I originally worked with on a low-budget feature called Crossroads to Crime. Playing a character called Diamond, I think. And it probably, Gerry got the idea because of his voice quality, etc., that he'd be a good Master Spy, and indeed he was. He was very good.
What's going on?
All right, mate, in here. Come on. You just stand there, keep very quiet, and you might not get hurt.
George used to drive me down to the studios. He was a character, George. He was a real character, sort of a countryman. He drove a, I don't know, Ford van or something, very fast, I remember. And he ended up by starting his own theatre in a converted church in London, near the Angel, to play Shakespeare. He was mad about Shakespeare. And he was the first Master Spy. And when he left, another actor who was a very old friend of mine. Sadly, they're both no longer with us, George and Cyril Shaps, who sadly died last year.
And why not? If we proceed to oil drilling, we wish to do it undisturbed. Therefore, we must dispose of Mustafa Bey.
Taken over.
that and the workshop. And just to make sure, I shall be right beside you.
I'm not precisely certain why George left, whether he had another job to go to or he'd had enough. I'm not precisely certain. But I remember when the part was up for grabs, Gerry and Sylvia, Cyril was playing in the West End at the time in I think a play by Paddy Chayefsky called The 10th Man.
Oh, yeah.
And he was playing an old, Cyril always tended to play parts much older than himself. And he was playing an old Jewish rabbi. Well, all rabbis are Jewish. He was playing an old rabbi in the play. And I said to Gerry and Sylvia, let's go and see the show. And then we went round afterwards and had a chat with Cyril, and that's how he came on board. And it was quite nice. He must have done quite a few episodes. And he enjoyed it a lot.
And Cyril Shops used to drive me home from these sessions.
Oh, really?
Before I had a car. He was a very kind man and very, very talented. Yeah, sadly gone, as you say.
Some days I'd be playing 3 parts with myself on one page, provided you left a short space between speeches and you had this ability to switch voices. It usually worked. You might be asked for any sort of character voice around the world. I mean, you might be playing a gangster.
Come on, bud. We're wasting our time.
You know, somebody like that.
Are you kidding?
Like George Cagney, Jamie Cagney.
Yeah. It could be Indians, Russians, villains from all over the world.
So we'd record 3 scripts in a day. At the end of the day, we would leave the 1/4-inch tapes with Gerry, who would edit the tape.
Some of which we took back with us. One of which we took back. He edited sometimes.
That's right. He edited the first recording while we recorded the second. Then we would take that back to Birmingham, transfer it onto 35, and then it would go back to the studios for the 35 to be edited to the picture.
We recorded, from the quarter tape onto 35mm magnetic, which then everything was 35, and then this would go back to them, and then they would edit this to the actual picture, so they synced up.
Basically, we did it like a radio show, just as The Simpsons.
That's
The
right.
Simpsons is a radio show that is animated.
Yeah, but they get more money.
Yeah,
Yes. I mean, they're on strike for another 5 million, I think.
Oh boy, yeah.
We knew we were going to be called upon to do 26 stories. So we just knew from the word go that we were going to have a little file which contained, literally typed out on half a sheet of paper, the next 26 stories. And then some of them wouldn't work, or something like that. But by and large, the stories themselves were only, a paragraph.
In the first 13 episodes, I suppose he was tight up against it, or tight up against Lou Grade's pressures, and there was no time for him and his team to do anything other than to shoot our shooting scripts.
The great advantage about being a single scriptwriter, or in our case, 2 scriptwriters, almost with the same mind, is that you don't have to have, again, all these complex discussions. You're on the same wavelength already. Oh yeah, all right, okay, so they will be going to, where will this be? It will be in Panama, you know what I mean? And there were hardly any arguments, which was a very good thing, because there wasn't any time for any arguments.
We took 4 to 5 days to write an episode. They shot 3 of them. Sorry, when I say shot, they recorded 3 of them in one daytime session. And it was under that sort of pressure that we were working.
When we came to write a script would take us a fortnight, okay? First to write the first draft, and then to clean it up. And what would happen is that one of us, whosever turn it was, we took turns on it to write, would write the first draft, and if it was me that had written the first draft, I then fired it over to Hugh and he wrote the second draft. And if it had been, and meanwhile, he would be writing the first draft of the next one. I've got to say, I look back at this, and from my experience since as a scriptwriter, as a television scriptwriter, I've got to say this was an enormous pace to write adventure scripts at, even if they were only half-hour scripts. I mean, one a week, complete shooting script, complete with all the, you know, angles and everything like that. One shooting script every week, wow. But actually, it took something like 3. Do you see? One, you had an idea. Then, as I say, the first draft was written by one of us, and then it was handed to the other one who corrected and did the same. And then, of course, at the end, of course, we sat down and, you know, and then we fired it in. That was it. That was all there was time for. Fortunately, as a matter of fact, fortunately, I think, because we didn't have time for enormous script conferences and all this kind of stuff. And you know what script conferences are like. I mean, forget it.
We like writing certain stories, using certain characters, and to be perfectly honest, we were quite pushed to bring Supercar into them. And there was one which I think was called A Little Art or something like that, which was all to do with a Salvador Dali-like painting, you know, in a desert with the cactuses and the, you know, the droopy folding watches and so on and so forth. And this was a story entirely about finding treasure. It was, you know, it was finally worked out that the cactus and the folding watch indicated that at such a time the shadow of the cactus would be long enough to point to exactly where the treasure was. Well, of course, there really wasn't any role for Supercar in that at all, except just as a mode of transport. So it's, oh my gosh, we'd better get there before the others do, sort of thing. Scottish Castle, Phantom Piper, yes, typical ingredients. Where the hell does Supercar come into it? But then, where the hell did Supercar come into things, you know, most of the time? Simply as a mode of transport to get you to Scotland or Ireland or Sumeria.
What on earth are they thinking of?
Watch for the end of the pipe, Beaker!
The first one I did with Des stands out more than any of the others, which was Icefall. It was, in a way, a departure on the rest of the series.
Experience.
Yes, yes, I think we can say that, because there were more involved camera movements in a very congested area than any other particular series, which gave us an awful lot of problem. But the problems were worth it, because I think it stands out as one of the very good episodes. The camera movements all told something, and all in all, that's the one I remember. I remember Des coming on when I was on this set, and it was a complicated enough set, and John was having very great difficulty lighting it. And Des said, well, I want the camera to start here, and I want it to move over there, and then go up and take a high shot down there. John and I looked at each other, and we glanced over to Des, and we then started rehearsing the camera movement, and it was very, very difficult for John to light it, because you had to get what's called a filler light, which is a light close to the camera. So you had to reconceive your idea of lighting. Instead of having the little filler light close to the camera, that had to go because the camera was moving all over the place. And John lit it finally, and I managed to rehearse the movements to Des's approval, and we shot it. But I think probably because of that, because it was the most difficult scenes in the whole series to shoot, that I remember it so well.
We had a clapper loader which you always think of a sort of 16-year-old boy who wants to get started in the business. Yes, Gav, right. Well, we had a guy who was about 70, and he'd been in the film business all his life, and he was very slow. And he, I remember his name now, and he always had a cigarette stuck on his bottom lip, which used to make me cringe. And he used to do the slate, and I'd taken me, I don't know, an hour to hang up this model of supercar about that long. And it was a spectacular shot because I'd managed to put a pivot in either end, the jet at the back and the nose a bit at an angle like that. And it had 2 wires going out like that, 2 wires going like that, and then 2 going down and down. So it was suspended in space like that, but it would pivot. And of course the whole idea that supercar was meant to be in a crash dive for some dramatic thing. And it was like that, and it was spiralling. And I got it all rigged, and absolutely great. I said, right, let's do it. Can we put a slate on, please? And this old guy got up and he chalked in scene 1, take 1, and he put it in through all the wires, like that. And he looked and he pressed the button on the camera, cut, and then he brought it back, and supercar model was hanging from the slate board with all the nylon things. And he walked back and went, sat down and put the board down. Oh, what's this doing? Oh, I'll never forget that. To go start all over again. Yeah. He was a sweet guy.
He'd always got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and he would have his hands in a changing bag trying to unload a magazine, and a cigarette in his mouth with about 2 inches of ash on, and sort of going like this, trying to get the smoke out of his eyes, and saying, "Dave, we need some more Duke of York." And I say, "What's Duke of York?" "Oh, he must mean chalk for the clapperboard." He was a great character. I don't know what happened to him.
And what was behind here, I really don't remember. I can't think whether the workshops were these were just toilets or what.
Well, we had the dark room down here, didn't we?
There
was a dark room, that's right. Yes,
and that old boy, he always used to have a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Right. He'd have his hands in a changing bag.
Yeah. Yes, with the long ash.
Yeah.
It's hard to remember it in this cramped place, isn't it?
It's in this little narrow corridor here. Yeah.
My strongest recollection of Icefall is the famous day when the time came to shoot in this ice cave. And so we just finished I'm expecting this ice cave to come moving in, and somebody said, "What do you mean an ice cave? What ice cave?" So I said, "Well, the next thing I'm shooting is in the ice cave." Well, everybody went absolutely. Everybody was looking at everybody else as much as to say, "Well, where is it? I haven't got it. Where is it?" So one person disappeared, another person disappeared, but Reg Hill did not appear. And the message came back, "Well, what's the setup?" So I said, "What's the setup? I mean, how can I give you the setup until I've got the set?" So then Reg comes out, "Well, what's the setup, mate?" And I said, "Well, I can't give you the setup." Anyway, there was this stupid, discussion about what the setup was. So I said, "Well, look, just put the camera there, will you, Julian? Put it there." And I said, "Well," and it was facing the bridge and the platform on which the set was supposed to be. And I said, "Well, that's the setup." Okay.
He then built the set.
He then disappeared, and there was a long, long wait. And then a sack arrived full of blocks of ice.
That's right.
And under these red-hot lamps, you can imagine how difficult it was to build an ice cave out of these blocks of ice. And as soon as we built it, another thing would slip and another thing would slip. And anyway, another sack of ice was sent for and another sack of ice. And finally, we had to do it ever so quickly. But we got a shot, didn't we?
That's
but
right.
it was a most memorable afternoon for me.
Oh, excellent.
Always remember it by saying, "What's the setup?" And he said, "Right, put the camera where you want the setup and we'll build it to it." you know, which is completely backwards.
In the first 13 episodes, at least, we weren't allowed to let Master Spy be violent to the extent of using guns.
I heard you from the gallery, Professor, and I think what I want is in that suitcase. Come back here, boy.
Instead was allowed the idea of frying everybody alive. In other words, hand turns on tap marked avgas. Place is flooded with aviation fuel, high octane, and Master Spy is there with a lighter, saying, you know, unless.
I always liked working with Des because he wanted the impossible. He wanted the shots that really you couldn't get. So we had to get them, and it meant that I was stretching my knowledge, technical knowledge, to the ultimate extreme sometimes to get the depth of field that he wanted, which was sort of from the beginning point to the furthest point, all in sharp focus, and the old-fashioned equipment we used, and I had to pour on light and reduce the apertures and do tremendous things which you shouldn't do. On one occasion, we had so much light that generated heat, the zip fastener on the puppet melted. You know, we've got all these sort of wonderful things that were happening, but it all made a great experience, and we really enjoyed it afterwards.
Hi, John. Nice to see
John.
you. Nice of you to join us.
Hello. How are you?
Yeah, well, I had to come and see how you're getting on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You've got a good head of hair, I see.
Yes,
What's it like being the other side of the camera, John?
Better than us two.
What's it like being the other side of the camera?
I feel shy.
Yes.
Very shy.
Well, this is the work. Was this the carpenter's bit, or was
This
this
was the
the?
carpenter's.
No, this was it.
This end, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We
The
think.
puppets were the other
We
end.
think.
There was a
As far as I
dark room
remember,
here
that.
somewhere.
You sorry, you?
That's behind.
Is there
yeah.
another room?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
But there was the carpenter's bit, and then there was the puppeteers bit. But I can't remember whether this was all one or not.
No.
Whether it was all across. But the main thing I remember, there were windows here, and there was lots of light. And the evening sunlight used to come in through here. It was very bright.
There was a big bench all down this
In the
room for the
centre.
carpenters
Mm.
in the
Oh,
centre,
right.
yeah. And we were working the other end.
Right. So down here was the puppeteers' workshop. So we go. Well, this bit was definitely the puppeteers' bit, as I remember.
Yes, I think it only went about this far, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's not,
there was,
wasn't as long as that.
yeah. I think there was probably a wall there where that pillar is.
Yeah.
Across like that. And it was in here when Mary caught her jumper in the electric drill. I remember I was having a meeting at that end of the building. But down there, chatting with 2 or 3 other guys, and the drill was, she was boring away with something with a rotary file. Rotary file, and there was this noise. We were shouting over the noise of the drill, and suddenly the drill went, and stopped.
Well,
And there was a little squeak.
What I did was turn it sideways so that the air from the drill blew the whatever it was away, the sawdust, and of course that was when it went into my jumper.
That's right, and she wound the jumper up, and she was like this, and she couldn't, and we had to very slowly unwind this thing, and this sweater was in this great long tube.
I can't remember if I ever wore it again after
No,
that.
it was coral colour, I remember now, and it had
Yes, it was,
a
you're
little
right.
bit of grease on it where it had
It would have.
gone into the bearing. And there was always the smell of fiberglass and
Oh, yes.
that very distinctive smell.
Yeah.
And
And that
P38.
vinyl mould.
Yeah, the vinyl mould.
Yeah,
those sort of
melting that stuff.
for all the moulding.
Preheated.
And it's interesting now because all those chemicals and things are so commonplace that everybody uses for
Sure.
model making. But
Well,
it was quite
some of them-
revolutionary when we had it. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember you doing something with heraldite for the first time. We'd never seen a glue that stuck so strong, and it was like it was new, and it was cutting edge stuff. Cutting edge.
Couple of things.
Well, it was over 40 years ago that we were
Yes,
here.
You're right.
Yes, it was.
I was a young man then. God.
I still am.
I had a very interesting job in as much as I did a lot of shopping up in London, and although we had our studio in Maidenhead, I found that I could hire or buy all kinds of things in London that would make our show look interesting, and so I used to look forward to going shopping in London. I'd spend a whole day, you know, around Soho mainly, not for the naughtiness of it, but because it was in Soho where you found all these strange little shops that sold all manner of things, like brass buttons of strange design, and I could go on forever really talking about these things that I used to buy.
And then the other part of the recording was, of course, the sound effects that we made up, which normally the film editor would ring and say, the scene is a supercar is coming in to land and the engines are roaring and it runs for 10 seconds and then it goes onto the ground. And I'd be busy making notes and then put the phone down and think, and how are we going to do all
I remember one instance, they wanted Supercar to be gliding with no engines. And I remember thinking, and eventually I got up close to the mic and I took a deep breath and took a very low, sort of, and kept it going. And then we looped it up and changed the speed and the EQ, and we got quite a nice effect of Supercar actually gliding.
Stand by to fire air brakes.
Hold tight, Mitch.
One of the main things I remember was the soundtrack. That was what I loved probably most of all. I think the sequence when they start Supercar up.
Tanks full. Engines charging at 15,000. Fire 1. Fire 2.
For the sound of Supercar's engines, we had an Acme editing turntable which had quite a lot of motors on it, at least 3. And by using these motors at various speeds, and then again changing the speed of them afterwards, and maybe sometimes putting them on several tracks, we did in fact achieve getting the sound we wanted for the engines.
I also remember the one that we never wrote, which was a dream sequence, which Gerry and Sylvia Anderson insisted be part of the repertoire. And we said, over our dead body, and they said, well, we're going to do it anyway. And they persuaded us that they would write the script, but to save money, they wouldn't reshoot the credits. We were credited.
The first episode of Supercar was directed by Gerry Anderson, but because of the expense of changing the titles, because there are only supposed to be 2 directors on Supercar, and that was Alan Patillo and myself, and to save the expense of having a directed by a Gerry Anderson title made, it was a toss-up between Alan and I who should get the credit for the first one. And it was drawn out of a hat and I won. So I was officially the director of the first episode of Supercar, but I wasn't.
The Lou Grade financed the first 13, which we wrote for £80 per shooting script. And then there was a pause to see whether they would sell overseas. And that pause went on for, I suppose, about sort of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. And then came the answer back from, obviously through Gerry Anderson, but from the Grade office, saying, yes, you go on for another 13. And we said, well, then obviously the thing is a success. We would like to renegotiate. And we offered what we thought was very reasonable, either to up the 80 by 50% to 120 a script, or for 100 plus a share of the residuals. So, cut long story short, they said, okay, you can have the 120. And that's when the trouble started, because that is the time, that's the first time that they were able to pause and think. Can we get these people cheaper? Can we substitute our writing for theirs? That's not mere conjecture. That is in fact what happened.
We had a completely informal, conversational agreement that if we wrote, you must remember, we were beginning writers. We were apprentice writers, right? So our price was bound to be cheap. We had an agreement which said, more or less, if you write the first 26 scripts and everything goes all right, we'll take you on at the proper rate for the job for the next 26. And that never happened. Now, I have no idea why not. We must have done a competent job. It can't be that we did an incompetent job, because we know that the series not only worked but was popular, right? So it can't have been that.
It was tacitly understood that we would be offered the opportunity to write the next series. In the end, this did not happen. There was no falling out. They simply stopped talking to us. It's as simple as that.
Of course, the second series of Supercar was rather more ambitious than the first one had been. It was much more lavish. There was much more confidence. We'd got the hang of all the characters and all the sets, and it had full of promise.
I think ATV or Lou Grade then started to say, hang on a minute, there's something here, we're going to start pumping more money in. And I always remember Gerry Anderson going up to town and coming back saying, yeah, got another 13 lads, that's it, it's going to be a slight break, going to build some more puppets and take it from there.
But unfortunately, we lost some of the crew. They had to leave in the hiatus between the two series. But we took on some new people, notably, of course, Derek Meddings, who became a permanent fixture. He was a great asset to the series and to later series as well that the Andersons made.
Derek Meddings, when he actually came on board full time, he started to develop landscapes. Everything seemed to progress. We started to learn. The special effects started to get better. The explosion weren't as hit and miss as what we were in the early days, because we were pioneering.
Also, there were changes in the scripting. For the second series, all the episodes were written by Sylvia and Gerry Anderson themselves. We had larger sets, and we had 2 sets of each puppet, so we could have 2 units filming puppets, the same character at the same time. I seem to remember we had changes to the end title music. It was a new arrangement was provided for that. But most significantly of all, of course, was this new famous caption saying, "Filmed in Supermarionation."
When it came to special effects, there was a very nice guy called Derek Meddings, who was a very competent and a very likable guy. And I remember one shot, and I can't remember the actual episode, but I wanted to do a long shot with Jimmy walking into foreground and a small biplane landing in the desert, quite a distant shot. And I suggested to Derek, could we possibly do this in one shot? He said yes, and he said also I'll get a small airline, and as the plane landed in the desert, you would see the dust blowing up, and this I thought was a very, very complicated shot, which he handled beautifully.
Brian Johnson was involved very early on there, and he'd be very enthusiastic about special effects. And one end of the studio was kept separately for kind of inserts and things. And there was one shot I remember through a window where Popkiss was actually making breakfast in his kitchen, and he was sidetracked, and he was supposed to burn the bacon. But I think Brian was rather enthusiastic, and there was a damn great explosion, and when the dust cleared, there was poor old Popkiss with an absolutely black face and singed hair, you know. And another shot where it was a test shot, shooting a bullet into the set, and he was quite happy that it was going to work, and his bullet went round the set, round the studios, everybody ducking everywhere.
We had, it probably was Master Spy or somebody, shot up the laboratory, and Derek very, very cleverly had small explosives all around the laboratory, so that when we fitted the sound effects of a machine gun, the whole thing really came to life. It was the most interesting and good shot.
One of the episodes I remember on Supercar was what I always refer to as a runaway train episode. And we obtained from the BBC a film called London to Brighton in 5 minutes. And it was a film shot by the BBC on a special camera, which went very slowly and so speeded up the action of the film. And the story goes that the train is running away with itself and it can't be stopped. Can Supercar save it?
That was the description, yes. The train is roaring down and Supercar has, and the grab comes down and doesn't quite, and then it comes down and you think, well, how are we going to make that sound?
We did have some electromagnets. We had a lot of things around in those days, and I expect what we did, we had a piece of steel and put a battery or a voltage across it so that eventually the piece of steel smacked up against the magnet.
He's made it! Gerry and Sylvia were always available to, you could talk to them if you were having problems, and but they tended to let you get on with things, but would be there to back you up if you needed any help.
They were, I think, fairly newly married, weren't they?
I believe so, yes.
And anyway, they seemed to be a very nice partnership, and they seemed to work together very well. And it was just sad that later on it fell apart. But my memory of them then at that time, and especially a little bit later, where he was making a little bit more money and they were quite generous in their hospitality. I mean, we had
some wonderful parties.
We had some very good parties, and at his expense. I can remember one in particular where we all went to their house. Do you remember that one? In the summer, and we were allowed to use the swimming pool and everything, and it was a very happy time. And I always remember the image of Gerry and Sylvia walking around arm in arm, and just enjoying it. I can always remember that, which makes up for all the, the unpleasantness.
Of course, the 1960s was a time of great success for filmed television series, and Supercar was very much part of that success.
It earned its success, actually. I think it was a very well received and very well presented. I think it had a major viewing time of about 5:30 on Saturday afternoon.
I'd only just got a television set, and I was about 8 or 9 years old when it first came on. And I was used to watching things like Muffin the Mule on my grandmother's television, and to see Supercar appear on the screen, I'd never seen anything like it, and it just grabbed my imagination. Obviously, as a small child, I must have had a vivid imagination even then.
The series was sold to the United States, to American audiences.
I heard somewhere that it sold to 242 different television stations. No particular network. That's bigger than any one network.
Where's all those repeats then?
Oh, there's a mystery, yeah.
Supercar! Supercar! Avec grâce et beauté, il bondit dans l'air, plus léger que le vent, et du haut des cieux comme un...
Eh bien, mon cher Achille, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce film?
Alors, il est très intéressant, mais moi, grand Ménélas, je préfère les films policiers.
Imbécile. Nous n'essayons pas de gagner un prix à un festival de cinéma, mais d'obtenir des renseignements qui en valent la peine. J'ai pris ce film il y a à peine 3 jours. Comme ces images.
Supercar, Supercar, cruzando el espacio, veloz como el rayo, el gran Supercar siempre va.
En cierto laboratorio del desierto se encuentra un cierto doctor llamado Beaker.
Se pone la cubierta del filtro, luego la del motor y se atornilla, ¿no?
Correcto, Mike, pero hay que apretarlo bien, de otro modo sufrirá gran fricción a alta velocidad.
Good day, Professor. Mr. Mercury.
Master Spy, what are you doing here?
I have come to finish our discussion about Supercar.
So it was you in disguise as the news reporter. I might have guessed.
But you didn't, did
Because
you?
along with all the success of the films themselves, there was the merchandising. They were a great boost for the series.
I remember getting TV comic. I had 6pence a week pocket money. And I really mean 6 old pence a week pocket money. The problem was there was this comic called The Eagle, and I had to choose between The Eagle, and I loved Dan Dare, huge fan of Dan Dare, and getting TV comic. And all of a sudden, Supercar appeared in TV comic. And of course, I also applied to join the Supercar club, which also came with a pilot's license, which gave you the starting instructions for Supercar and a Supercar badge like that, which I still have to this day, and which I've been offered vast amounts of money for, but I won't part with it because you couldn't get another one of those.
And this was a cutting room here, if you remember. Came out of the corridor there.
Where the cutting rooms were.
And
I
this,
do remember that.
Yeah. Except the door was there. And there was one cutting room here and one there. And then there was a ladder out there to climb up to the cutting rooms upstairs.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
There were 2 more cutting rooms upstairs and a little bay where we used to edit the quarter tapes after the recording sessions. Well, which Sylvia did mainly, but sometimes Alan Patil and I would have a go. She was busy. Yeah. Well, that's changed a bit.
I actually don't remember any of this.
You probably didn't come in here.
We never came into the cutting room.
No.
I don't think so, I remember.
It was much too clean for us, wasn't it? Much too clean down here.
You used to come in because you used to paint the gun flashes on.
Yeah. Gun flashes.
Do you remember when the puppet fired a gun?
Yes.
Because there was nothing in there. And you used to paint the flashes on.
Yeah.
2 frames.
2, wasn't it?
2, definitely 2 frames.
I felt generous one day.
The Supercar series made quite a splash. It was a great success, in fact, with the younger viewers especially. Especially too with my own nephews and nieces, who enjoyed it enormously. And especially when the caption came up saying AP Films, they thought, oh, this is Uncle Alan, this is Alan Patillo Films. It was a misconception, of course, that I happily encouraged.
Supercar! Supercar!
I always remember my first interview with Gerry. He said, it's a puppet series we're doing, Julian. He said, it may run for 6 months, if we're lucky. He said, possibly it could go further. He said, but if it runs for 6 months, we will have been very fortunate. And several years later, he was still making them.
The thing about APF, there was nothing at the front door and a finished product that was constructed inside came out the other end, and it was all done within.
After about 15 years, there's a new surge of viewers we've got, and really it's the children of the people who watched it in the first place.
Oh, I think they go on forever. They keep coming back, I reckon.
And here I was having an absolute ball and making things that I've always wanted to make, playing with puppets, and at the end of the week they pay you money as well, you know. So it was like a paid hobby, and I kept on thinking I'm going to wake up from this dream one day, but I never did, and still haven't actually.
I was only in it for the money.
I still look back on it now and think they used to pay me for doing all that, having all that fun.
Oh, no, great days, great days.
Oh, yeah, without question. Extremely proud, and yeah.
I would call it the cornerstone of my voiceover career.
It's a great feeling to be part of something that has gone on so long. Yeah.
I am pleased to have been creatively associated with both Supercar and the Avengers because I regard them, I still regard them, and, you know, we're talking history here practically, as being seminal. Do you see? There was something different about them which has not happened since.
I would say AP Films was a great opportunity. Gerry was very kind in giving a lot of people their first starts, and i.e. directing and cutting. And I look back with nostalgia and think, yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Well, it's funny coming back here, isn't it?
Expect to see the ghost of Little Arthur.
Yes, it's strange with it being a tyre warehouse.
Yeah.
It's sort of, it's hard to relate exactly to how it was
when we came here.
Yeah.
And obviously, as I said earlier, the smell of rubber and oil is
absolutely.
But anyway, it's good to
fun.
see everybody.
Yep, nice to see you.
I can't remember the last time we actually met. For me, anyway, because I left quite early on.
Yeah, so 40 years ago.
Yes,
yeah.
it is.
That we saw you.
It is that.
Yeah. Anyway, shall we go? Shall we go back for our chariot?
Yes. Okay.
Please leave me alone. I know what I'm doing. Oops. Oh dear.